Welcome to CNBC TV 18's Startup Manthan that we are doing conjointly with the Department of Defense Production and Innovation at Aero India 2019. With this panel discussion today, it's a broad one. We have representatives from industry, we have representative and policymakers from India and the US. We have a scientist from NASA who works closely with startups here in India as well as in the US. And of course we have Suyog, who represents the startup ecosystem here in India, a young company that's working in the A&D sector. So let me kick off this panel discussion, and let me start with you, Phil. I want to begin by asking you, from the perspective of Lockheed Martin's Innovation for India program, the growth program that you've had. It's a startup innovation program, sort of accelerator of sorts that you've had running in India since 2007. So over 10 years now. The ecosystem has changed drastically, especially in the last few years. We've really seen, with some progressive policy at least from the government as well, a lot of startups proliferate. Can you give us a sense of how your own program within Lockheed has had to keep pace with what's happening as far as innovation is concerned?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the question and the opportunity to talk about the program. I think, you know, when we started, we heard a number being quoted early that when the defense startup program was started, they received 500 applications, and they felt that was a good number. You know, back in 2007, for a nationwide competition that was not confined to one particular technology at that time, we had about 100 applications, and now we're getting in the region of 3,000 a year. So we have adapted the program over time. We started off with a very wide net of technologies we were looking at. And then a couple of years ago, we're partnered with the Department of Science and Technology. We brought on Tata Trust as a partner, that they would look at the societal technologies, and we would look at the more aerospace and defense-focused technologies. And I think, you know, with the advent of the new defense program in startups, I think that's a really encouraging thing, and we're seeing more implications from aerospace and defense-type companies as we go forward.
Anand, let me come to you. The Airbus Biz Labs that you've been running now for the last 3 years, I think globally there are about 50-odd startups that have been part of the program. In India you've had 16, and you've been able to convert 6 of those into actual commercially, commercial programs, commercial connections, either with Airbus or with your larger network. Can you give us a sense of what you hope to do in the next iteration of the Biz Labs, in conjunction perhaps with some of the programs that our policymakers are running as well?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'd like to thank Secretary Jaju for a wonderful, brilliant event that you hosted here. And I'm really honored to see so many people here. I'm a little intimidated, in fact, to see so many startups and such super smart people. So, little bit about BizLab. This is the crown jewel of Airbus in terms of how we change and how we look at the future. Airbus has been always a very innovative technology company. What BizLab does, there's only 4 BizLab centers in the world, and globally led by Bruno, who's right in the middle, and one of the 4 is led by Siddharth, who's right there. Please raise your hand so that people know who the superstars are here. And they have engaged about 2,000 startups all over the world, 2,000 startups. And the number actually, in terms of how many we have engaged and accelerated in this region out of Bangalore, the region is from Israel to Southeast Asia, is 20 startups. And 6 of them have been contracted by Airbus.
All right. So you were part of the Biz Labs program. I want to get, tell us a little bit about your own startup journey in that sense, right? Working in an area that is a difficult one, simply because not just because of its technical nature, but also commercializing your products and services. Give us a sense of your own journey in that sense with Navy, and what was it like liaisoning with, you know, folks at Airbus, for instance. You were part of the BizLabs program. What has it taken for you to take some of your products and services to government? What are the challenges and what have been the opportunities?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So we have a product called Bodhi as part of our company, and it's a product which is horizontal in nature, mostly applicable for the manufacturing industry. So when we were selected as part of Airbus BizLab, the mentorship which was given to us to configure a product for mostly the aerospace world, that kind of mentorship, you know, it allowed us to make sufficient changes in the product so that it can be applicable to the industry, as well as specifically talking about the problems within Airbus which the product can solve. When we started our journey, we were, you know, team of 4 people. Now, after the mentorship, after the opportunities of implementation of the solution within the Airbus world, now we are 20 people, and we have offices registered in Europe as well. So for us, BizLab has been a game changer. In fact, very classic case of incubation, where you take an idea and then take it to a level where it can be applicable not only to the aerospace, but with the references available, it has given us a platform to implement it across multiple industries as well. As far as your question of government is concerned, we had not worked with any of the organizations so far, so it will be premature for me to talk about that at this point in time. But we are very much open if there are opportunities.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that one of the positive byproducts of going through a mentorship program or an incubation program, apart from getting the business at the end of it, was also been refining your idea, correct? Did you find that you were possibly working on an interesting product or service, but perhaps not directly aligned to what industry requirements were?
Yes, of course. There were certain features which we thought probably would be the most important ones, but as we started talking to people within BizLab as well as with the larger groups within that, we realized that some of those need to be either toned down, or probably some of those which we thought may not be very relevant essentially became far more important to the business world. So of course there was a phase of refinement as far as product is concerned, but more refinement was more in terms of the business model, the revenue model. How do we position it such a way that it is palatable, the revenue model is palatable to the larger manufacturing industry as well as for the startups. So the refinement was more on those lines rather than the product, but of course
a mix of both.
It's a journey of evolution.
All right. On that note, I'm going to come to you, Mr. Jaju. What we've heard from this side of the panel in that sense is more on the commercial and the business aspects of, you know, commercializing technology in the area of aerospace. As far as defense is concerned, now the IDEX program has put out those 11 challenges that you want startups to work on, or if they're working in an allied area, look at how they could apply those to those key challenges and then start building up. But what we've heard is, again, in terms of the mentorship that would be provided, or the hand-holding that would be provided to further refine those ideas and actually, you know, take them to fruition. Give us a sense of how the program is presently structured to enable you to do that along with your ecosystem partners.
So yeah, the idea was emanated from the fact that, you know, defense is a fairly complex area of operation. I mean, you have technologies which have a lot of gestation periods. Sometimes the needs of the users are not clear, and of course if the needs are not clear, the proponent also will not be able to give them a perfect answer, because nobody has the right answer. A lot of technologies emanated originally after the World War II from defense globally, and most of it incubated in government-controlled laboratories and government-funded laboratories. But over the last 20-25 years, we have seen an increasing tendency of startups actually outsmarting those government-funded labs. And to an extent, we needed to bring that energy into the defense establishment. And the idea was to get in the energy and innovation coming in from the startups and use it for national security needs. And as we understand, national security has a lot of technology-related ramifications these days. So we wanted to create an ecosystem wherein startups can engage with the defense establishment, and we become a kind of a bridge between them and the defense establishment. So that's how the Defense Innovation Organization was established. Honorable Prime Minister launched it last year during TEP Expo. And when we started the organization, we were actually not very sure that we are going to come to this stage. We're talking to about 500 startups, where we issued challenges, and you have more than 500 responses coming in. And in fact, all our jury members are having a real tough time in evaluating these responses. But it goes to show that the energy that startups bring into the ecosystem has a lot of potential to be translated into a prototype. And so what we do from the government side now is, we have launched these challenges, we have a lot of entries coming in. Now we are going to have them present their proof of concepts. And once we understand that their proof of concepts are aligned with the needs of the defense establishment, then we also have a mechanism wherein we fund the development of prototype coming in from the proof of concepts going into towards the prototype development.
I'm going to come to you, Vikram and Shrija as well, and this is to both of you. Give us a sense of your own experience in the United States of having built out a similar program, and what your learnings thereof have been as far as collaboration between defense departments and startups is concerned. Now when you look back, what are some of the sort of salient features of that program as far as creating a market for startups is concerned?
So, as far as I'm concerned, first of all, I want to thank everyone, thank the organizers, the Ministry, Invest India, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum sees this innovation cooperation is actually fundamental to our national security. It's not just about sparking innovation for innovation's sake. It's about making our country stronger and more secure. And I really want to thank the Indian entrepreneurs who are here tonight. I mean, how amazing that we have this incredible ecosystem already alive. And what the defense establishment is really trying to do is benefit from this ecosystem that is coming up on its own. Far from being the large source of revenue and potential for startups, the defense establishment and government in general is mostly viewed as quite the opposite. If you're a young startup and you're in your go-to-market phase, you are trying to become an unstoppable force. Right? You're trying to get over this hump and get revenue and get to profitability. And as you're trying to become an unstoppable force, government has traditionally looked a lot like an immovable object. You would not want to go there. And what's happening now, because we have leaders like Joint Secretary Jaju, like Deputy Assistant Secretary Felter, and people that are creating these programs, is government is saying, well, wait a minute, we're not immovable. We have ways that we can bring your relevant technologies into this extraordinarily large, important for the nation market. And I think it's extraordinarily exciting to see what's happening right now. But it's also just a start. What we're doing now is figuring out how to get to the prototype stage. But startups have only a few ways in, either through a major company, an Airbus or Lockheed, being a partner, perhaps being a subcontractor to one of those companies, or through growing to a point at which they can invest in doing business with government.
Shrija, so she's a scientist on the panel, and we were chatting earlier actually. So before we get your impressions on startups and how the NASA works with them, you must tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you're doing at NASA. One of them is satellite traffic management. I mean, who thought that satellites would need traffic management soon? But apparently they do.
Thanks for having me on this panel. It's this whole event is fantastic and a little intimidating, like some of you pointed out. So to touch on your question as well as space traffic management, it's actually related because space traffic management is something that we're bootstrapping together at NASA Ames Research Center, primarily so that startups and any players in the space industry can collaborate with each other, talk to each other, make decisions about which spacecraft goes up when and how they avoid collisions in space without having to pick up the phone and talk. So we're trying to make this process as seamless as and as autonomous as possible. And what we're trying to follow the mantra, which is structure where necessary and flexibility otherwise, so that you provide a ground where new players can play without too much bureaucracy. So to go on to your question, NASA helps startups and small businesses in several ways. One is through direct funding. We have a program called Small Business Innovation Research Grants. On an annual basis, they end up spending about $150 million on more than 400 proposals. And it leads to a lot of innovation, which is basically small businesses doing products which are very, very innovative, but also in sync with NASA's own research. And what we're trying to do is making sure that their product reaches the market and is scalable and repeatable, which NASA is not usually doing. Another way is we advertise programs that come up with new products, so that if there are industry partners that want to make it scalable, they can reach out and take NASA technology and make it scalable. There's several other programs that I can talk to you about, but essentially what we're trying to do is recognizing that technology by definition is dynamic. It moves so fast that if we're in the government and we're siloed in bureaucratic procedures, then we're not able to catch up with what's happening outside.
Can you give us a sense of to what extent NASA technology is open sourced in that sense to startups that get incorporated into the program? And how does that collaboration then work outside of serving certain needs that NASA might have? Which is the question of, NASA can't be the business builder for these startups. The startups still have to figure out their business on their own.
Right. So the way NASA works is we do things that the market cannot support. We're flying missions to Jupiter or Uranus looking for water on the moon because the market can't support ventures like that. When we realize that there is enough capability in the market to take care of things that we don't need to do, we immediately contract that out. So SpaceX was born this way, and all of the other rocket companies came out that way.
I want to try and understand from both of your perspectives, Lockheed as well as Airbus, does it make sense for you guys to actually have senior technical or non-technical folks from your companies go out to these educational institutions and actually kind of, spark that seed of you can do something really interesting in the aerospace industry with us?
That's very true, and that's something I think we've recognized and introduced into our India Innovation Growth Program by bringing in a university challenge element, because we recognize that's where the ideas are formed. And in fact, we've seen, from a student challenge where we, part of the program, put out a challenge to all of the universities around the country, we've seen startups come out of some of these student challenges where they've got the bug, not just for the idea and the science and the technology, but also for the business angle, which we've tried to inculcate as well as part of the program. So yes, we would say that's a very important connection with academia, government and industry get together really through this program, through University Challenge and the Startup Challenge.
Anand, from your perspective?
Great. It's a little bit of a cycle, and let me explain what I mean by that, right? We obviously have been in India for a long time, so we've got a partnership with the Indian Institute of Science and all the IITs, and we do challenges and competitions, and we do grants and scholarships, and also we are middlemen in terms of connecting Indian Institute of Science with the French universities or the European universities or with the Chinese, so on and so forth. So it's a network that we are trying to create, which brings in a lot of ideas and all of that. But it's also a feeder pool for us to get talent into our company from the IITs. But what's interesting is it's not just what you get in, but what you push out. It's also that how do we as Airbus, or I used to work for Lockheed, or any of the large companies, not squelch and choke creativity after people come in and after the ideas come in. And that's why BizLab, we don't want BizLab, Airbus BizLab, to sit anywhere on an Airbus campus or close to us. They have to be away from us.
How much of a challenge did you see it when you were starting out to, have some sort of seed capital to get going? And, before BizLabs happened to you, did you seriously think of, hey, even if you took it to a certain stage, were VCs, angel investors biting? Was it, not clickbaity enough? Tell us a little bit about that part of it.
We are a B2B startup. So when we started initially, this was 2014, 2015, and majority of the funding was going to B2C companies because of the hyperlocal wave going on. So initially there were few VCs or few people who we could, out of 10, maybe 2 or 3 VC groups were investing into B2B kind of startups. But over last 1.5 to 2 years, we see that changing. It has pretty evolved. Now you would see 5 to 6 VCs out of 10 who would be willing to look at B2B startups. So this evolution has happened over last 18 to 24 months, which is a good thing for us, and for companies who are planning to cater to defense sector, to aviation sector, are mostly going to be B2B. And with VC fraternity opening up to B2B startups, that is really a good news for startups like us. So that has changed for good now.